Stand behind the podium. Emma, nobody wants to look at your tired face while your brother makes history. My mother's hand pressed against my shoulder blade, steering me toward the coat check like I was luggage she wanted out of the frame. Just make sure the champagne glasses stay full, she whispered through a lipstick smile. That's the only contribution you've ever made to this family. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I simply adjusted the silk scarf at my throat, picked up the empty tray a caterer had abandoned on the marble counter, and glanced at the brass clock above the fireplace of the Rosewood Hotel's Confederation ballroom. 11 minutes. The anonymous institutional buyer my family had been courting for 3 weeks was scheduled to arrive in 11 minutes. And not one person in that room knew she was already there. Holding a tray of empty flutes, wearing the sensible black dress her mother had once called appropriate for the help. From my position near the service wall, the panorama of the Harrington family legacy spread out in front of me like a case file I had been assembling my entire life. To my father, Garden, people were never sons and daughters. They were spreadsheets with faces. Every child was a line item. Every Christmas, a cost-benefit analysis. My brother Theodore, Teddy, to the country club set, was his blue chip holding, the one asset Gordon would not diversify away from. No matter how many quarters the returns came back red. When Teddy torched his first condo deal at 23, Gordon called it a learning expense. When Teddy got a DUI off Lakeshore Boulevard and needed a Bay Street lawyer to make it vanish, Gordon called it risk management. When Teddy blew through the seed capital for his short-lived microbrewery in Etobicoke because he refused to be there on weekends, Gordon called it exposure to the hospitality sector. I was the write-off, the subsidiary my father regretted opening. When I was accepted to the Ivy Business School at Western, he told me the family's cash flow was committed elsewhere. So I worked. I cleaned offices on Bay Street from midnight until 6 in the morning, walked across University Avenue to my 8A M. Finance lecture, and slept on the Viva Blue bus back to my shared basement apartment in North York. I graduated with a concentration in real estate finance, a letter of recommendation from a professor who later sat on the CMHC advisory board, and exactly $0 of Harrington money in my pocket. When I accepted my first analyst position at a distressed asset fund downtown, my father asked why I didn't pursue a commission-based role like my brother. Salaries were for tellers. He said, "Winners eat what they kill." That appetite had brought us here, to the most expensive ballroom in Ottawa, to watch Teddy finally sign the deal he had been chasing his entire adult life. The situation was textbook. Teddy had found what he called a generational opportunity. A boutique commercial property group called Laurier Capital Trust was opening a final equity round for incoming partners. The buy-in was $250,000 Canadian. Teddy had burned through his last bailout before Thanksgiving, and his joint account with his wife had been frozen over an unpaid tax assessment from the CRA. But he had convinced Gordon that Laurier was the golden ticket, the partnership that would pay back 3 decades of faith and finally justify every dollar my father had poured into his only son. I watched Gordon straighten his tie at the head table, his reflection wavering in the polished silver of the ice bucket. His hands were trembling. He covered it with a laugh that was too loud for the room. He looked across at me, standing against the cream-colored wallpaper, and his lip curled the way it always did when silence made him uncomfortable. "Pay attention. Emma," he said, loud enough for the other guests to hear. "Your brother is about to secure this family's position for the next generation while you count coupons and worry about your rent-controlled hole in the wall. This is what vision looks like." He gestured across the room, at the crystal chandelier and the salmon canapes and the group of 7 print above the mantel. "Every year I spent educating you was a loss I'll never recover. Emma, you are the definition of a sunk cost. Try to be useful tonight. Pour straight and keep quiet." I gripped the edge of the tray until the silver rim bit into my palm. Sunk cost? The textbook economic term for money already spent. Irretrievable, and therefore irrelevant to any rational, forward-looking decision. But my father was not a rational man. He was an addict. He had bet so heavily on Teddy for so long that he could no longer entertain the possibility of stopping, because stopping would force him to confront a truth he was not built to survive, that his entire theory of family, of legacy, of his own judgment, had been wrong. So he sat there at the head of that table, ready to co-sign against the only clean asset he had left, the paid-off Rosedale house he had inherited from his own father, just to keep the illusion of Teddy breathing for one more quarter. He did not know I was not the liability anymore. I had not been the liability for a very long time. I was the auditor. And tonight I was closing the file. To the Harringtons. I was the quiet one. The daughter who worked somewhere vague in finance, who brought store-bought pie to Christmas dinner because Marguerite from my mother's book club always outdid me on dessert. Here is the secret I had carried for the last 6 years. I was not an analyst. I had not been an analyst since I was 27 years old. I was a managing partner at a distressed debt fund with offices in Toronto and Vancouver. We bought bleeding companies for a fraction of their face value. We bought mortgages that banks had given up on. We bought the debts of reckless men who had signed documents they should have read more carefully. Some of the deals restored companies to health. Most of them we took apart piece by piece and sold for scrap. To the industry, I was known as a scalpel. To my family, I was still the girl who couldn't afford a leased Lexus. 18 days ago, my firm's monitoring algorithm had pinged a mid-sized real estate trust registered out of a serviced office on Spark Street. Laurier Capital Trust was soliciting partnership buy-ins at $250,000 a head. Our diligence team pulled the filings within an hour. Laurier, what's a shell? A carefully dressed shell with a logo and a website and a leased conference room. But a shell nonetheless. The trust had negative operating cash flow for 7 consecutive quarters. It was bleeding investor capital to pay distributions to earlier partners. The oldest pyramid in the book. And it was weeks away from an OSC inquiry that would freeze every dollar it still held. My brother had been bragging about Laurier all autumn. He told anyone who would listen, including the minor hockey parents at my nephew's rink in Rosedale, that Laurier had sought him out. He told them his reputation had preceded him. He believed it. What Laurier actually saw was a desperate 38-year-old with a father who owned a detached Edwardian north of Bloor, free and clear. They saw collateral wearing a pocket square. And they opened the door. When I realized my brother was about to walk into a controlled demolition, I almost picked up the phone. I almost called Gordon from the Porter Lounge at Billy Bishop and told him to get on a flight to Vancouver and not come back until the OSC had done its work. But then I remembered Teddy's wedding, where I had been seated at a children's table despite being 26 years old. I remembered my mother handing me a handwritten note the morning of my Western graduation that said the family had decided not to travel, because Teddy had a hockey tournament in Barrie that weekend. I remembered my first promotion, when I had called my father to tell him, and he had asked whether my title came with a company car or just a longer walk to the photocopier. So I did not warn them. I bought the demolition crew instead, through a numbered Ontario corporation that traced back to a holding company in Nova Scotia. I purchased the controlling debt of Laurier Capital Trust for 19 cents on the dollar. That was 11 days ago. I did not just own Laurier's paper. I controlled its board. I controlled its compliance process. And I controlled the man who was, at this very moment, pushing through the revolving door at the front of the Rosewood. Mr. Beaumont, Laurier's senior intake officer, was not a senior intake officer at all. His name was Daniel Cote, and he had spent 14 years as a forensic accountant with the RCMP Integrated Market Enforcement Team before I hired him to run compliance for my fund. He was the most patient, most methodical man I had ever met. He could ask a question 3 different ways and watch which version made you sweat. I had given him one instruction for tonight. Demand proof of liquid funds? Do not accept a hard copy. Push until my brother does something federally stupid. From my post against the wall, I watched Teddy at the far end of the signing table. He was flushed. He kept running his finger along the inside of his collar, then resting his hand on the leather portfolio beside him as if he were afraid it would wander off. I knew exactly what was in that portfolio. Teddy did not have $250,000. He had just over $600 in a Tangerine checking account, a maxed-out TD Visa, and a home equity line of credit his wife had refused to co-sign. But he had told Gordon the money was in place. He had told Laurier the money was in place. And to bridge the distance between what he had said and what was true, he had done something so obvious. I had almost laughed when my team flagged it on his email metadata. He had taken a PDF statement from his personal banking app, opened it in an off-the-shelf editor he had downloaded to his work laptop, added 3 zeros to the closing balance, and saved it over the original. He had printed the result on linen weave paper he had bought at the Staples on Yonge Street, slipped it into an embossed envelope, and convinced himself a thick piece of paper could beat a compliance system that had been designed by a man who used to investigate this exact category of fraud for the mounted police. He clutched his portfolio. He thought the only risk in the room was the deal falling through. He did not know the real risk was the sister standing 12 feet away, holding an empty champagne tray, waiting for him to hand over a document that would convert his desperation into a criminal charge the Crown would not have any trouble prosecuting. The tall oak doors at the ballroom entrance opened. Daniel Coate walked in. He did not look like an intake officer. He looked like a verdict in a charcoal wool suit. He carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm, and he moved across the hardwood with the complete indifference of a man who had dismantled careers on 2 continents before lunch. He walked past me without a glance, exactly as I had briefed him, to the Harringtons. I was furniture, and Daniel was to treat me accordingly. He stopped at the signing table and extended a hand to my brother. "Mr. Harrington," he said. His voice was quiet and certain. "I have been looking forward to meeting the candidate we heard so much about." Teddy stood too fast, and his knee knocked the corner of the table. A flute of San Pellegrino tipped and soaked the corner of a linen napkin. He laughed, too loud, and gripped Daniel's hand. "Mr. Bummel. An honor. My father, Gordon Harrington. My mother, Eleanor." Gordon pumped Daniel's hand and smiled the smile he used on strangers at the Granite Club. "We are delighted to move forward this evening. Teddy has been looking forward to this partnership for some time." Daniel sat, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and laid the portfolio flat on the table. The room's temperature seemed to drop by 2 degrees. "Enthusiasm is welcome," he said. "Solvency is required. This round closes at midnight, per the trust deed. I trust you have the liquidity confirmation we discussed by email from the service wall." My mother snapped her fingers. The sound cut across the room like a dry branch breaking in a frozen forest. "Emma," she hissed, loud enough for the nearest table to hear. "Mr. Beaumont does not have a glass. And honestly, do we have to walk you through every responsibility?" I picked up the champagne bottle. There was a time when that snap of her fingers would have made the back of my throat close up. There was a time when I would have spent the ride home staring out the window of an Uber, cataloging the casual cruelty and promising myself that next time I would say something, but that girl had been replaced. Dollar by dollar, deposition by deposition, quarter by quarter. The woman holding the bottle now was not a daughter. She was a predator, and silence was the last camouflage she needed. I moved to the head of the table. I poured Daniel's glass with the steady hand of someone who had signed term sheets larger than this room. Not a drop fell outside the rim. As the bubbles climbed the crystal, I heard Teddy lean toward Gordon and whisper. I adjusted the numbers. Teddy murmured, "It looks clean." Gordon's breath caught. "The PDF?" Gordon whispered back. "You're sure they can't tell?" "They cannot tell," Teddy said. "It's a scan of a scan by the time they open it." I set the bottle down. I stepped back. They thought my stillness was obedience. It was an inventory. There is a kind of power in being treated as nothing, because people who think you cannot hear them will explain their crimes to you in complete sentences. Teddy cleared his throat and recovered his volume. He slid a thick cream envelope across the table toward Daniel. Certified bank statement. Mr. Beaumont, confirmation of $250,000 in a liquid Canadian deposit account. Ready for transfer at your instruction. Daniel did not open the envelope. He looked across the room and his eyes landed on me for the first time. That was the cue. I stepped forward, keeping my chin down, letting my voice go a half octave softer than it had any business being. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Mr. Beaumont, I forgot to mention earlier. The event venue's encrypted scanner went down an hour ago. Their IT team isn't on site tonight. Teddy frowned. Then just take the paper. He said, compliance requires a digital original. I told him gently. The way a junior receptionist might. Something about chain of custody for the trust's filings. It's for everyone's protection. I turned a polite, apologetic smile at my brother. If you could simply forward the PDF directly from your banking app to the address Mr. Love, Beaumont provided earlier. We can display confirmation on the screen behind the stage, and you can sign before the Laurier board call at 10. I pointed at the large monitor the hotel had set up for the ceremony. Teddy froze. His hand drifted toward the laptop bag at his feet and stopped. I watched his pupils widen. He did not have a banking app with $250,000 in it. He had a forged PDF on his desktop at home and a different forged PDF. Sloppier. On his laptop's downloads folder. If he logged into his real bank, he was exposed in front of his father within 60 seconds. If he forwarded the file he had manufactured from his personal email across a provincial boundary to a compliance officer employed by a federally registered trust, he had committed fraud under Section 380 of the Criminal Code, and, because the wire crossed into Quebec servers, a parallel offense under the federal proceeds legislation. Right now, he asked. His voice had thinned. Laurier's funding window closes at midnight. Mr. Harrington, Daniel said, glancing at his watch. If we cannot verify funds within the next 10 minutes, I have a candidate from Calgary on standby in the lobby. Panic is a stupid thing. It makes clever men clumsy. Teddy was so close to the moment he had imagined since he was a teenager. So hungry to hand Gordon, the thing Gordon had been waiting 30 years to receive, that the part of his brain that might have paused went quiet. He pulled out his laptop. He opened his email client. I watched him attach a file named TD, Statement No Veni. PDF. I watched his thumb hover above the enter key for exactly 1 second. I watched him press it. My phone vibrated against my hip. A single soft pulse. I glanced down. There it was. The email. Sent from my brother's personal Gmail to the compliance inbox of a trust I now owned. Across provincial lines. With a fabricated financial statement attached as evidence for a $250,000 transaction, he had just committed indictable fraud. He had done it in a ballroom full of witnesses, and he had sent the evidence straight into the device of the sister he had called useless every Thanksgiving for 15 years. I looked up. He was smiling again. He thought he had won. He thought the worst danger was behind him. He had no idea he had just put his signature on the wall of a prison cell. Daniel checked his tablet and nodded once. He did not congratulate anyone. He closed the portfolio halfway and opened it again with a second document inside. Funds appear verified, he said. However, the trust's bylaws require a 48-hour holding period for any digital deposit of this size before the partnership seat is locked in. To secure your candidacy tonight, before the Calgary alternate is offered the position, we need short-term collateral against the buy-in. He turned the document to face Gordon and slid it across the mahogany. This is a deed of trust. It will place a temporary lien against the principal residence you hold clear title to at 114 Chestnut Park Road in Rosedale. It secures the $250,000 buy-in for precisely 48 hours. Once the wire clears on Monday morning, the lien dissolves automatically. It is standard for expedited admissions. The room went silent in a way that felt pressurized. Gordon's hand hovered over the document. That house had been his father's. His grandfather had bought the lot in 1951 on a returning soldier's loan, It was the only asset Gordon actually owned without a bank behind it. It was his pension, his position at the Granite Club, his identity at every Saturday morning coffee at Summerhill. "Is this necessary?" Gordon asked. His voice had lost half its volume. "The board requires hard collateral for expedited partnership entries." "Mr. Harrington," Daniel said, "if the lien makes you uncomfortable, we can extend the Calgary offer within the next 4 minutes, and you can revisit with Laurier in the spring." Teddy leaned in. Dad, do not blow this up. It is 48 hours. The money is there." Gordon's eyes flicked to me, the way they had flicked to me my entire life. Searching for something to blame, I kept my face blank. I made sure my shoulders looked small. I made sure I looked like the daughter who had no earthly idea what a deed of trust did to a family home. "Once I am partner," Teddy whispered, "the Muskoka cottage is ours by Labor Day. You will be untouchable at the club. Bobby Fitzsimmons will be pouring your whiskey at Christmas." The fear drained from Gordon's face and was replaced by something worse. Greed. 30 years of betting on one horse. 30 years of sacrificing a daughter. A retirement. A marriage that had long since gone silent. All to keep this one story alive. Walking away from the table now meant admitting every choice he had made as a father was a catastrophic miscalculation. His ego was not built to survive that admission. This is how real men build something that lasts. Gordon said to no one in particular, although he looked at me as he said it. Signed. Daniel's stamp came down on the bottom right corner with final sound. The lien was recorded against the Chestnut Park title. The collateral was locked in place. The trap had closed around a foot that had walked into it willingly. Teddy leaned back in his chair and allowed himself the smile I had been waiting 20 years to see dismantled. "Emma," he said, turning toward me for the first time all evening. "When I upgrade the security system on the cottage, maybe I will throw a shift your way. You are good at standing quietly in corners, with a better uniform," my mother added. She laughed. 3 women at the next table laughed because she had laughed. I set the champagne bottle down on the silver tray. I picked up my phone from the serving counter. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the chair beside Daniel, and sat down. "Actually," I said, "no one is upgrading anything." I plugged my phone into the display cable the hotel had coiled beside the monitor. The Rosewood's AV tech had already confirmed the mirror. I had asked him to. 2 hours ago, when I had done the walkthrough my parents were unaware of. "Mr. Beaumont, a moment, please." Daniel paused, folded his hands, and waited. "Emma," Gordon snapped. "Sit down. You are embarrassing yourself." I tapped the screen. Exhibit A appeared on the ballroom's giant monitor. Incorporation documents. A numbered Ontario holding company. Below it, a disclosure of ownership interest in Laurier Capital Trust. Dated 11 days ago. The signature line read Emma Harrington, Managing Partner, Kildare Distressed Credit Partners. "I own Laurier." I said, "I have owned Laurier since the 8th of this month. Mr. Beaumont works for me. Everything that has happened in this room tonight has happened at my direction." No one spoke. Somewhere in the rear of the ballroom, a fork hit a plate, and the sound felt enormous. I tapped again. Exhibit B, Real-Time Balance. Theodore Harrington, TD Canada Trust Checking, $638.12. The decimal cursor blinked on the wall behind him like a small heartbeat. Teddy's face turned the color of cold veal. Exhibit C, the PDF he had sent 20 minutes ago. I zoomed into the embedded metadata. I highlighted the line that confirmed the document had been created in Adobe Acrobat at 6:41 that evening. I highlighted the font substitution in the balance field, where Helvetica Bold had been laid over the original Arial. I highlighted the 2 missing characters in the bank's machine-readable routing code at the bottom of the page. I turned to face my brother. "You forwarded a fabricated financial statement across provincial lines." over an open wire, to a federally registered trust, to induce a $250,000 transaction. That is fraud under Section 380 of the Criminal Code. It is also a breach of the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act because the trust's compliance servers are in Montreal. The sentencing grid for first offense fraud over $5,000 runs up to 14 years before we even get to the laundering charge. My compliance officer has the original email. So does the trust. So does my counsel. Gordon's pen clattered onto the wood. It was a placeholder. Teddy whispered. Emma, it was going to be gone by Monday. You were going to borrow it from the only clean asset left in this family. I said, using a lien on Dad's house. I laid 2 documents on the table in front of Gordon. Option A. I instruct Mr. Beaumont to forward the complete file to the OSC and the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit first thing Monday morning. Teddy is charged. The house is named in the statement of claim because the lien records it as collateral for a fraudulent transaction. The CRA will be notified of the misrepresentation within the same cycle. You lose everything. And Mom spends the rest of her 70s answering questions in a deposition room on King Street. Option B. Teddy signs a deed in lieu of foreclosure, transferring the Chestnut Park title to my holding company. In settlement of the loan, his document tried to induce. No criminal file opens. Teddy stays out of Joyceville. You and Mom keep your names off a court docket. Emma? My mother said. Her voice had climbed to a pitch I had never heard from her before. You cannot do this to your own family. I looked at her. I took the champagne flute she had been holding for the last hour, the one she had expected me to refill without being asked, and I set it firmly on the table in front of her. Pour your own tonight. Mother. She recoiled like I had slapped her. You lost the house the moment you signed the deed of trust on a forged document. I said, turning back to Gordon. The only choice left is who holds the title tomorrow morning. A numbered company in Halifax that lets you keep sleeping in your bedroom. Or the Crown, who will auction it by Easter. Gordon looked at Teddy. Teddy's mouth was open. Whatever was happening behind his eyes was not language. Gordon looked at my mother. She had no help to give him. Finally, he looked at me. And for the first time in my 34 years on this earth, I watched my father understand who had been running the accounts all along. Give me the pen, he said. He signed the deed, in lieu. Daniel witnessed it. I slid the original into my portfolio and closed the clasp. Welcome to the rental market, I said. And I did not smile when I said it. I turned to Daniel. Wait in the car. If I am not outside in 5 minutes? Forward the full compliance package to the OSC and the RCMP with the cover letter we prepared. Daniel nodded once and left. I looked at my father. You can stay in the house, I said. I will cover the property taxes and the maintenance. You and Mom have a lease for as long as you are upright. Gordon's shoulders dropped a full inch. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Relief, naked and embarrassing, flooded her face. But Teddy leaves tomorrow, I said. Teddy's eyes bulged. Emma, my condo is in arrears. The bank is starting proceedings in December. I have nowhere to go. I picked up my phone and unplugged it from the display. That is not a Harrington problem anymore. That is a Theodore problem. You are a liability, not an asset. My fund does not carry liabilities on the balance sheet. I walked toward the oak doors. Behind me, the first voice to rise was my mother's. And it was not aimed at me. It was aimed at Teddy. The second was my father's. And it was aimed at her. They were already turning on each other before I reached the coat check. The November air on Wellington Street was sharp and clean. It smelled like wet stone and approaching snow. Daniel was waiting at the curb beside a black sedan, reading something on his tablet. He looked up, folded the cover, and opened the passenger door without a word. I got in. I did not look back at the hotel. I did not look back at the window of the Confederation ballroom where, somewhere behind the amber glass, 3 people were learning for the first time in their lives What it cost to underestimate the quiet one. 6 months later, a letter arrived at my office on Bay Street. It was in my mother's handwriting. I recognized the loop of the capital E from every birthday card that had ever arrived 2 weeks late. I did not open it. I set it on the corner of my desk, poured a fresh cup of coffee from the cart in the corner, and turned back to the Vancouver file that actually required my attention. Outside the window, the CN Tower stood exactly where it always stood, patient and upright, and the snow was just beginning to fall.